All right. Good afternoon. Number of you have been in touch with me this morning, asked me for some updates on we've been doing on Lebanon. And I can tell you that obviously the Secretary General and senior staff, and especially colleagues on the ground, have been following the situation very closely in terms of what developments in South Lebanon and in northern Israel. Our special coordinator for Lebanon, Jeanine Hennis-Plasschaert, has been in constant contact with all concerned actors to urge for restraint and calm, as well as to support diplomatic efforts to end this cycle of violence urgently. We continue to urge the parties to recommit to the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 and return to a cessation of hostilities to restore stability. The leadership of the UN peacekeeping mission, UNIFIL, has also been in touch with parties on both sides of the blue line. Meanwhile, Tor Wennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, briefed the Council this morning by video conference on the Secretary General's latest report from Security Council Resolution 2330. Somebody has some audio open somewhere in the world, and Wayne, if we could deal with that person. Thank you. Tor Wennesland, our special coordinator, as I told you, just briefed the Council via video conference from Washington, where he is currently to meet with U.S. officials. He was briefing on the report, the Secretary General's latest report on Resolution 2334, which dates, as you will recall, from 2016. That resolution calls on Israel to, quote, immediately and completely cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and to, quote, fully respect all legal obligations in this regard. Settlement activities has nevertheless continued, the special coordinator said. Mr. Wennesland informed the council members that the Secretary General reported that the level of suffering witnessed in Gaza is unprecedented in his mandate as Secretary General of this organization. To address the colossal humanitarian needs to improve the intolerable conditions of civilians, the Secretary General said Israel must fully open all crossings with Gaza. It must also facilitate the immediate, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale directly to the Palestinian civilian population throughout the Gaza Strip in accordance with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Mr. Wennesland began by expressing his grave concern over the growing risk of a wide-scale regional escalation. The series of explosions across Lebanon and rockets fired towards Israel in recent days only adds to the volatility. He calls on all sides to refrain from steps that will further worsen the situation and take immediate steps to de-escalate. And you saw the Secretary General's statement that was issued yesterday after his press conference. On Gaza, our colleagues at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs inform us that as of September 15th, there were 15 emergency medical teams supporting local health workers, including 3 in northern Gaza. So far in 2024, emergency medical teams embedded in hospitals throughout the Gaza Strip have provided more than 1.4 million medical consultations. However, due to obstacles hindering the entry of humanitarian aid in Gaza, the backlog of health supplies and equipment waiting to enter continues to grow, while health facilities within the Gaza Strip are facing increasingly severe supply shortages. Public health care facilities in southern Gaza are reporting an over 70% shortage of critical medical items. And our health partners also tell us that the waiting list for medical evacuation of critically ill and injured patients out of Gaza continues to grow on a daily basis due to the lack of systematic referral mechanism. As of September 12th, more than 14,000 patients for whom medical evacuation have been requested since October of 2023. Just over 5,000, or just 35%, have actually been able to be successfully evacuated outside of the Gaza Strip. Only 219 patients were allowed to leave Gaza by Israeli authorities since the closure of the Rafah crossing in May of 2024. Meanwhile, with the approaching cold and rainy weather, and that will be the second winter for both, obviously, the civilians in Gaza, but also for the hostages who continue to be held in Gaza. Your partners focusing on shelter report they're unable to import enough material to provide sufficient protection from wind, rain, or flooding. Access constraints continue to limit the entry of shelter material into Gaza. Partners are also trying to find ways to maximize the response, such as prioritizing the entry of sealing off kits over tents, since more of these can be transported in a single truck. But this is the bare minimum and insufficient to match the needs of repeatedly displaced families. Humanitarian partners also finalized a preliminary mapping of displacement sites which may face flooding during the approaching winter season. 38 makeshifts and 13 scattered sites in the Khan Yunis, Deir al-Balah, and northern governorates are deemed likely to experience flooding to varying degrees of intensity. Once again, our humanitarian colleagues say it is critical that humanitarian organizations can reach all parts of Gaza wherever they are needed. Moving to Yemen, the regional directors of the UN Human Rights Office, the UN Development Program, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UN Children's Fund, the World Health Organization, and the World Food Program, as well as several non-governmental organizations, issued a statement marking the 100 days since the arbitrary detention by the de facto authorities in Sana'a of more than 50 people from UN organizations, from international NGOs, and from national NGOs, as well as civil society and diplomatic missions. In addition, 4 of our staff members have been detained since 2021 and 2023. They urgently called, in the joint statement, they urgently called for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained colleagues. Despite immense challenges, including insecurity and staff safety concerns, diminishing funding, and a shrinking humanitarian space, we and our partners are committed to continuing to provide much-needed humanitarian and development support to millions of Yemenis wherever they are. And turning to Haiti, the Secretary General has taken note of the appointment of 7 out of the 9 members of the Provisional Electoral Council, representing different sectors of Haitian society. Members representing human rights organizations and women's rights groups are still to be appointed. The Secretary General encourages those 2 sectors to submit their nominees to allow the Provisional Electoral Council to be fully operational. And you will have seen that we issued a statement this morning in which the Secretary General strongly condemned the terrorist attack that took place in Bamako, in Mali, on Tuesday. Mr. Guterres extends his sincere condolences to the families of the victims, as well as the transitional government and the people of Mali. He also wishes a speedy recovery to those injured, including one of our own, a member of the UN Guard unit in Bamako, who is there as part of the drawdown of the peacekeeping mission, which is officially left. The Secretary General calls on the Malian transitional government to ensure that those responsible for this despicable act are held to account. Moving to South Sudan, the peacekeeping mission there issued a statement today jointly with the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, otherwise known as IGAD. They noted the presidency's decision to extend the country's transitional period by 24 months, basically till February of 2027. They expressed concern that this is the second time an extension has been needed due to a failure of implement critical benchmarks in the 2018 peace agreement, and regrettably, none of these extensions have delivered peace or timely elections. The AU, IGAD, and the UN peacekeeping mission call on all parties to break the perpetual cycle of continuous transition and for them to prioritize the interest of Sudan and its people. Relatedly, Nicholas Haysom, the head of our peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, yesterday addressed an extraordinary meeting of the reconstituted Joint Monitoring Evaluation Commission, which is responsible for monitoring the adherence of the parties to the agreed timelines. He said the UN would endorse the extension of transitional period, albeit with regret and with disappointment. Turning to Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues are sounding the alarm about the devastating human cost of the international community if the international community fails to act. In a new update from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, says the lethal combination of hunger, of displacement, and of disease outbreaks is creating a perfect storm for the catastrophic loss of lives in Sudan. To beat back hunger in the country, the World Food Program is working around the clock to reach 8.4 million people by the end of the year. In 2024, the agency has assisted more than 5 million people, including 1.2 million people in the Darfur region. Meanwhile, UNICEF continues to move life-saving nutrition supplies and Meanwhile, UNICEF continues to move life-saving nutrition supplies sufficient to treat some 215,000 severely malnourished children in Sudan. The agencies and its partners have also provided 6.6 million children in Sudan and their families with safe drinking water this year, at a time when disease outbreaks, including cholera, are worsening, as we've been telling you. Children account for about half of the more than 10 million people who have fled their homes since the conflict in Sudan erupted last year. 2 million of those displaced have crossed into neighboring countries where UNHCR is delivering urgent support. The UN Refugee Agency is providing critical protection services to help move the vast number of new arrivals away from border areas to safer locations in the countries of asylum. Unfortunately, these efforts are severely hampered by the lack of funding, flooding, and insecurity. This year's $1.5 billion plan to support the regional refugee response in 7 neighboring countries is less than a quarter funded, with only $347 million in the bank. Meanwhile, the response inside Sudan is less than half funded. The 2024 appeal received just $1.3 billion of the $2.7 billion needed to reach 14.7 million people in the country through the end of the year. We're very grateful for people who have given money and converted those pledges into cash, and we encourage others to follow suit. You've all been asking me about the number of trucks going into Sudan. I can tell you that more than 113 aid trucks have moved into Sudan from Chad via the Adre crossing since it was reopened by Sudanese authorities last month. And just yesterday, another 5 trucks moved through the crossing. In total, supplies for more than 250,000 people have crossed into Sudan via Adre. Those supplies include food, nutrition, shelter, medical, and other much-needed items. Also want to flag that on Wednesday, that would be Wednesday next week, there will be a high-level ministerial event to address the spiraling crisis in Sudan in the region. OCHA and UNHCR are co-hosting the event along with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United States, the European Union, and the African Union. And also, for the record, you heard yesterday Martha Poby, Assistant Secretary General for Africa, and Joyce Msuya, the Acting Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, briefed the Council members on Sudan, focusing on the very dire situation around Al-Fasher. Moving to Europe and Ukraine, we're being told by our colleagues on the ground that attacks yesterday and today in the region of Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Dnipro resulted in civilian casualties, including to local authorities. Our colleagues warned that humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate due to intensified hostilities in the town of Pokrovsk in Donetsk. Around 16,000 residents, including more than 170 children, remain without water or gas, and electricity is intermittent. Authorities are urging residents to evacuate to safer areas. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that shelling in the Kharkiv region yesterday hit an area close to where a Ukrainian NGO was transporting displaced civilians from high-risk areas to a transit center in Kharkiv city. No one was injured, thankfully, but passengers and humanitarian workers were shocked and received psychological support, but they continued to the transit site. In July and August of this year alone, humanitarian community in Ukraine experienced a total of 16 incidents of violence against aid workers and facilities. Want to flag that, as with every year, the Secretary General's report on the work of the organization was published and is published today, mandated by Article 98 of the Charter of the United Nations. The report is available in, of course, all 6 official languages and in 2 accessibility format, in line with our disability inclusion strategy. This year's theme of, quote, resolve is connected to last year's theme, determined, with further emphasis on action. It represents a dual meaning of the organization having resolve and the UN working to resolve global challenges. The report is structured around 8 priorities identified by the General Assembly, an introductory chapter, an additional chapter on the organization's effective functioning. This version of the report draws on data, infographics, maps, and imagery to highlight the achievements we've made. It is online, and look at it and read it. Almost. 1 second. 2 more items, including a quiz. 3 more items, including a quiz. A good quiz. They're all good, but this one's very good. Want to say, just for the record, that yesterday we announced that the Secretary General had appointed Susan Brown of Switzerland as Assistant Administrator and Director of the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy at UNDP. Ms. Brown succeeds Ulrika Modir of Sweden, to whom the Secretary General has expressed his gratitude for the important duties and responsibilities she performed during her 6 years at UNDP. Ms. Brown's most recent work was providing strategic advisory, advocacy, and policy and communication support to various international organizations, and we congratulate and welcome her. Also at 4 p.m. today, if you want to have a little bit of culture, as they say, 4 p.m. we are invited to preview an art exhibition that is set to take center stage as world leaders convene for the General Assembly next week. The exhibit is called Large Nature Model, Corral. It was created by the world's first open source generative AI model and generated a database of some 100 million images, drawings, 100 million images, drawing attention to the impact of climate change in our marine ecosystem. It was developed by Rafik Anadol Studio. The artist will be here this afternoon, along with Melissa Fleming and Vilas Dar, the president of the Patrick McGovern Foundation, who facilitated this. It is on the curved exhibition wall by the glass by the Japanese Peace Bell. It is the same artist who did the amazing exhibit on a much larger scale at MoMA. So please do go and see it. It is very cool. Benno agrees. He concurs. Today, quiz, 2 member states. What are the similarities between El Salvador and Gabon? Yes, oh yeah, they both gave money. Okay. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, the same currency? No. I'll tell you, all good guesses, but there's something very interesting that happened today. Both countries paid the exact same amount of money in dues on the same day. They both delivered $615,000 on the exact same day.
Do you think that was coordinated?
I don't know. Do they coordinate? I don't know. You should ask both the Gabonese and the El Salvador missions. But anyway, we are grateful to our friends in San Salvador and Libreville for having paid on time. What? Yes, you were close. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question about the resolution yesterday the General Assembly adopted and basically demands Israel must end its presence in occupied Palestinian territory. So the question is, do you have a comment on that? And also, when it comes to the implementation of this resolution, what is expectation of Secretary General?
Well, as always, we expect member states to abide by all resolutions, including General Assembly resolutions. The resolution requires the Secretary General to report back on its implementation. He will do so, and I think, as he said to you yesterday, before the adoption, in answer to a question from Abdelhamid, that he takes very seriously the decisions of the International Court of Justice. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. As you just said, UN officials have been calling for de-escalation following the explosions in Lebanon, but the head of Hezbollah said today that a red line had been crossed and there will be retribution, and we are already seeing new attacks across the border between Lebanon and Israel. How concerned is the Secretary General about this? Is there anything else the UN can do? And what impact do you think that this might have on the upcoming Summit of the Future and general debate?
Well, listen, on your last question, we very much hope that member states are able to both focus on how to deal with immediate crises, but also, very importantly, focus on how to deal with future crises, which is what the Summit is the Future is about. And I think the Secretary General was much more eloquent than I could ever be in explaining the importance of the Summit of the Future for today's problems as well. The Secretary General's, I think, concern is growing, given what we saw yesterday, the exchange of fire along the blue line, the increased rhetoric, and that's why he's being kept informed of the situation very closely, and that's why we're using the mechanisms that we have, which is UNIFIL. As I mentioned, its leadership has been in touch and remains in touch with all parties along the blue line. The special coordinator has also been in touch with all relevant parties, and we're all pushing the same message. But I think it's not enough for us to do that. We need the international community. We need member states who have an influence over some of the parties to exercise that influence in a positive way. Sylviane.
It's almost the same question to Edith's question, but the following is Prime Minister McCarthy called for Security Council meeting tomorrow. He urged UN to stop Israel's technological war against Lebanon. How really can the UN, and you said it, but can you say it again, how the UN and UNIFIL can stop efficiently the technological war against Lebanon?
Sorry, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Sylviane.
Say it again.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Thank you.
There will indeed be a Security Council meeting, I think, tomorrow afternoon. I believe we've been asked to brief, and we will. Let's be honest, do we have a magic wand to stop the conflict? The Secretary General doesn't, and I think he's been very clear on that. What we have are mechanisms, whether it's through the special coordinator, whether it's through UNIFIL, whether it's the special coordinator in Jerusalem. And I will remind you, but as you of course well know, that these mechanisms and these mandates were created by the Security Council, were created by member states. So it's why I'll go back to my last answer. It is important that member states also exercise a positive influence on moving towards de-escalation. So when we talk about Lebanon, so the tens of thousands of Lebanese who've had to flee their homes in the south can return home, and the tens of thousands of Israelis who've had to flee their homes can also return. Amélie.
Thanks, Steph. On a completely different topic, the advisory body on AI that the Secretary General created last year published its report this morning, and it does not go as far as what the Secretary General kind of suggested, like creating an AI international body on the model of the IAEA. They say they don't recommend that it's not the time to do that. So what is the reaction of the Secretary General to that?
I will let his special advisor on technology, Mr. Gill, who's here, who will be here in a few hours, to comment on that. Abdelhamid Benno Deji, and we'll go to the back.
Thank you, Stéphane. The attack Israel conducted against Lebanon in 2 days left many, many people killed and thousands of people wounded. But I haven't heard the word condemn this attack. I heard the word concern. I heard the UN representative in Lebanon, she said she was saddened. How could an attack with that magnitude, leaving so many casualties, not straightforward condemn with the strongest term? That's my first question.
Abdelhamid, we use the words that we use. They were clear. It is to you, and you're right to disagree and write about that disagreement and your disappointment, clearly. But I have nothing to add to what we've already said.
My second question about the report of Mr. Wennesland to the Security Council, and he repeatedly said again and again and again that Hamas used civilians as a human shield. First, it hasn't been proven that they use civilian as a human shield. And second, those are their families. They're members of the same family. I mean, the resistance didn't come from heaven. They came from these people. So when a resistance fighter go to visit his home and family, is that a human shield? Does that justify killing as many civilians, even if there is a resistant fighter visiting that?
On justification, I would refer you to what the Secretary General has said about there's nothing that justifies this violence and this collective punishment. On the issue of human shields, it is based on the information that we have, and civilians are civilians regardless of relationships. Benno.
Thank you, Steph. My question is also about the exploding devices in Lebanon. I wonder how you assess the attack. What I mean is, I think it's fairly clear from the nature of the attack that you can't rule out that civilians are close to pages or walkie-talkies that have been exploding, so civilians can be harmed. So I ask myself, do you assess that this was an indiscriminate act?
Again, I will refer to what we've already said. I'm not going to do some post-attack analysis. We have seen, though we've seen from press report, that, as you say, children have been injured and others have been killed.
Okay, then I have another question. About Mali. You read out the statement again. Do you see any relation between the withdrawal of the United Nations mission in Mali and the security situation in Mali? Or to be more direct, is Bamako less safe after the Blue Helmets left?
I think that's an assessment and an analysis that you can draw pretty clearly for yourself. Deji.
Well, first, UNIFIL, with this increasing tension between Israel and southern Lebanon Hezbollah, is there any extra cautious procedures being done by UNIFIL? How's the escalating situation affected the mission there?
Look, we of course our peacekeeping colleagues along the Blue Line continue to implement their mandate in what are extremely difficult circumstances. And I don't know if some of you saw, but we also saw a UNIFIL vehicle being attacked and pelted with stones yesterday in Tyre, in South Lebanon. Of course, thank God, no injuries were reported, though the vehicle did sustain some minor damage. It is very important that peacekeepers be respected, not be intimidated, not be threatened, or not be targeted. But we will continue to implement our mandate as directed by the Security Council.
And couple more follow-ups. First one with Abhamid's question about whether UN is condemning this last century communication device explosion thing. We're not trying to write stories like UN failed to condemn this attack or condemn this explosion, but can you share some consideration behind this statement that the Secretary General is deeply alarmed but not condemned?
Look, we have seen, you can focus on one incident. We have seen over and over again in this particular phase, right? Let's say, because this has been an open conflict area since October 7th, of just escalation of violence, escalation of actions across the Blue Line, and escalations of suffering of civilians. What we want to see is movement in the opposite direction.
So far, no condemnation
I've,
is better
I've
for
used,
the
don't,
situation.
I use the words that I use. The Secretary General used the words that he uses. Up to you to do the analysis.
Okay, second follow-up on Benno's first question about the explosions. I was wondering if it was ISIS-K did this in Kabul, will the UN call it an act of terror?
What are you talking? I'm sorry.
I mean, if ISIS-K did the beeper,
I think we are very clear in the language that we use. I'm not going to speculate if ISIS-K was going to do something.
No.
I'm not in the game of speculating of what ifs. Things happen. We speak about them.
But do you think this is an act of terror?
Things happen. We speak about them.
But do you think that
I don't know what other words to use. Margaret Bashir. That's two other words I will use.
Going back to the Lebanon incident, the Secretary General is deeply alarmed. Would he condemn the killing of the 2 children that were confirmed killed? One was buried yesterday.
Of course, we stand against any killing of children. Okay, let's go to the screen. We'll go to Mike and then Joe.
Thanks, Steph. I wanted to first clarify something that the Secretary General said yesterday in his briefing with us, that he would back the implementation of the General Assembly resolution should it pass. He made those comments in the moments before it passed. That's correct, that he backs the implementation of that resolution? Steph?
Sorry, hold on. If there's somebody talking in the room. Let's start again, Mike. He's the Secretary General of the UN. If there's a resolution that passes and that asks him, clearly requests him to do something, he will do so, because those are the instructions he receives from member states. And so that's what happened, and he encourages. I mean, he encourages member states to respect the resolutions that are passed.
So the resolution itself, if you look into the details of it, it mandates that Jews be cleared out of Judea and Samaria, including Area C, and it also demands that Jews are cleared out of the old city of Jerusalem, which is included in the definition of occupied Palestinian territory by the UN. So basically takes us back to Jordanian rule, where there are no Jews. It's Judenrein. There's no Jews allowed.
No, I think that's what the
Secretary General supports?
The language supports an end to the occupation, which is what the Secretary Generals and previous Secretary Generals have always called for.
The evacuation of settlers. Those Jews living in the old city are defined as settlers by the UN.
He has called for an end to the occupation, and he has called for the end of settlements, and he's not. Joe. Joe? Okay, we'll give Joe 2 seconds to find the mic. Joseph Klein?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good, okay. Actually, Michael asked part of my question, but number one, the Secretary General does recognize that the opinion of the International Court of Justice in this case, that the General Assembly resolution reference is merely an advisory opinion, which is non-binding. So number one, would the Secretary General acknowledge that that opinion is non-binding as an advisory opinion?
The Secretary General recognizes and understands the opinions and the rulings that come out of the International Court of Justice. He is not one to reinterpret them.
Well, okay. I'm not going to press you on that, but it doesn't really totally answer the question, because there is a distinction between advisory opinions, which are non-binding, and opinions coming out of a dispute between 2 states, which is binding.
I'm not going to get into a legal argument with the lawyer.
Okay, all right. Let me just drill down a little bit in terms of what the Secretary General envisions as part of his mandate to implement the resolution that the General Assembly passed yesterday. In addition to the reporting requirement, could you tell us what other specific mandates he believes the General Assembly resolution is requiring him to fulfill? For example, the resolution talks about establishing a mechanism to determine reparations that Israel would presumably have to pay for alleged damages to the Palestinians, at least since 1967. Does the Secretary General see as part of his role helping to establish that mechanism?
The Secretary General believes will follow instructions given to him in this resolution as he does with other resolutions passed by the General Assembly.
Yeah, but again, that doesn't fully answer the question as to the resolution is rather lengthy, talks about reparations several times. It talks about establishing a mechanism. Does the Secretary General see that as one of his responsibilities, or is he going to be waiting for further instructions?
There is, I think, one clear mention of a request to the Secretary General was to report back on the implementation of the resolution, and he will do so. Okay, Abdelhamid, then we're going to go to our guest, which is, who I failed to say was David Nanopoulos, the Chief of Treaty Section for OLA, to talk to you about the usual treaty event.
I want to rephrase my colleague's Deja's question in a different way. I was about to ask the Secretary General this question, but I was restricted to one question. My question is, what happened in Lebanon isn't a textbook behavior of what is called state-sponsored terrorism.
I have answered the questions on Lebanon to the best of my ability. That may not meet your needs, your standards, your expectations, but that's what I've done. I will now leave you with the